G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Today we are answering the subscribers' questions from the ballboysnba.com. Let's go!
Jordan open. Chicago with the lead. Bryant to Shaq.
Not a game. We talking about practice.
LeBron James with no regard for human life. Anything's possible.
Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Curry for three. Wow! Unbelievable. Making it rain in New York. We the North are now we the champions.
Not the destination, it's the journey. Mamba out.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at BallBoysNBA and on Instagram at BallBoysFantasyBasketball. Today we are going to go through some questions that have been sent through over at ballboysnba.com. These questions are being asked by people who have subscribed to the season guide, and they will be getting all of their questions answered. And I will be doing these kind of podcasts semi-frequently in the preseason, depending on how many questions I get. During the season, I want to kind of make it a bit of a weekly podcast session that I do once a week, answering your questions to help out with your specific teams, with some trade questions, some waiver wire acquisitions, priorities, all those kind of things. So, hopefully going to see a little bit more of this. I am releasing it to the public because I think that other people might benefit from this as well. But if you want your specific question answered in a podcast form, make sure you go and subscribe at ballboysnba.com. It's just $10 for the entire season, along with the opportunity to ask me direct questions that are answered on podcasts. You get access to our season guide. You also get access to our articles over there as well. And there also might be some other cool things coming your way over there. But let's get stuck into it today. We've got a few questions to kick it off. So thank you guys for sending those in. If you are a member of the season guide and you haven't been able to locate the question tab, when you go to ballboysnba.com, there is a tab on the left-hand side of the screen. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you might have to click those three little dots there to open that bit up. But there's a section there called Exclusive Q&A Podcast. If you hit that, when it loads up the screen, at the bottom right-hand question, there's a little blue square. If you are logged in as a subscriber, that blue square will appear, and you can click it, ask your questions there, and then they get sent through to me, and I can see them, answer the questions here on the podcast. So that's how it's done. This is going to be the first installation of this. We'll see how it goes, and then if you guys ask some more questions, we'll answer them again as we get closer to the start of the season. So question number one, we are talking some keeper leagues. So the question here is, hi Mitch, I'm having a difficult time deciding between who to keep between Tatum and Cat in my 12-team, 9-category head-to-head 3-keeper league. Keep along with Cat and Tatum, I should say. Who would you recommend between Garland, Bam, Siakam, and Fred VanVleet? This gentleman says that his gut tells him Fred VanVleet and punt the field goals and blocks, but his knees freak him out a little bit. So, look, I think the answer here, there's a couple different ways you could go. In a per-game ranking for this upcoming season, I do have Fred VanVleet as the highest-ranked guy in this list. However, you could, depending on your league setting, go a number of different ways. I think that, personally, I prefer, if it's in a keeper league, I'm assuming that you'll have the opportunity to again, choose your 3 keepers for the next season as well. I think that Garland might be the pick for me in this group of guys, and then I would look to punt the blocks in that build. I think that Tatum and Cat are not the biggest shot blockers, but they are still very valuable in like a power forward and center position. They can give you good percentages. Garland's percentages are not horrible either. So your field goal percentages is okay still. It might not be elite, but it's still okay. You'll be able to beat other punt field goal percentage teams. You'll have excellent points, threes, free throw percentage, assists are all going to be there. You might need to focus a little bit on steals. Okay, so that is the negative of taking like a Garland over a Fred VanVleet. Although Garland's steals were pretty solid last year, I have my doubts whether or not he can keep it up at the same level. I don't think he's ever going to be elite in that category, but I do think that if you wanted to skew away from VanVleet and the knees and injuries worry you, and it does worry me a little bit just with the high amount of minutes that Nick Nurse plays, Fred, I think that, and his age, he's not old by any stretch, but he's definitely older than Garland. I think that Garland would be the pick for me here. The other option you could go down is the Bam Adebayo way, because I think Bam is obviously a really nice big man. If you had like a 2-center league, that might be the option that I go. So I can start with 2 elite big guys with Karl-Anthony Towns and Bam. I'm protecting my free throw percentage still really well. Perhaps Kyle Lowry is someone who gets a bit more rest and he's aging out. And again, after Kyle Lowry kind of leaves, we can see Bam go straight back into that second round consideration with his assists rising up where he was before Kyle Lowry joined the team last season. So I guess it depends on how long a term you're kind of thinking here. I think all of them are very similar in value. I don't think there's a huge stretch and difference in those kind of players. So for me, it would be between Garland and Bam because they're the younger guys. They're the guys I think with the higher upside. I think for me personally, of that bunch, I think Garland would be my pick. So Siakam, I think, is probably a little bit outside of these guys just because I don't think he has the upside to go much higher than this. I think he's a really safe guy. And again, he's around that kind of area of these ones, but I just don't know the scenario in which he gets into that second round, whereas I can see all 3 of those other guys being a second round player. Siakam, I think, is just a half step behind them in terms of his upside for me. And I think that's what I would do. So let me know if that's helpful, or let me know in the comments, everyone else, what you would do in that situation between Garland, Bam, Siakam, and Fred VanVleet. But I would go Garland and punt those blocks if it was me. All right. Question number 2. Okay, we've got a 9-category roto, 10-team, 13 roster spots, plus 2 injured reserves. He's got 2 keepers, Durant and Anthony Edwards. He's got the 6th pick in his draft. It is linear, not snake, so that's a good point to make. Which draft strategy should I take, and what are types of players that I should be targeting and avoiding? So I think that with Durant and Edwards being your 2 key building blocks, your points, threes are looking excellent. I don't think you need to worry about that per se. Don't get caught up too much in the players that are empty points getters would be the players that I would be avoiding. So an example might be like a Jalen Green, a Zach LaVine, even someone like a DeRozan. I wouldn't prioritize. Ja Morant, Zion, because of the free throw percentage. I wouldn't be targeting those guys because I think your points are pretty good with those 2 guys as your first players. I would be trying to prioritize getting some good steals, rebounds, assists, and blocks. So immediately players that come to my mind are players like DeJounte Murray, Robert Williams would be really good early targets. So guys that help you in both percentages, help you with those other categories like steals and blocks with Murray and Rob Williams respectively. And then with the added risk of Kevin Durant, I would be trying to, at least early on, avoid injury-prone players. You know, maybe someone like an Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard, Kristaps Porzingis. You might lump Rob Williams in that, but I'm not as concerned with him compared to some of those other guys. Just the real obvious injury risks, I think, are ones you maybe want to avoid. And then look to sort of really get those blocks, I think, are really important with good percentages. Get those steals and assists are probably the big ones because they're going to be harder to target later in your draft. So, we could go through all of my targets and everyone that I like, and it depends on where things go in your drafts. But I think don't overvalue the points would be my biggest takeaway. Make sure you get those other stats to really, they're worth just as much. And I think with Edwards and Durant, you're off to a good start with the points and threes. So, yep, that would be my advice there. Question number 3. We've got a guy here who, again, another 9-category, 10-man league. Second pick, he's taking Giannis, so I'm going to assume it's a head-to-head. Doesn't mention here. Not sure who to take on the way back with pick 19 and pick 22. He's thinking of Kawhi / DeJounte into a Gobert. He's worried about Paul George's bad field goal percentage. So I think for me, the best case scenario, and it's hard, again, not knowing who's going to be there, but best case scenario for me is that an Anthony Davis makes it back to you, and I do see that as a possibility. Some people are just not taking Anthony Davis. They're worried about his injury risk. I think with Giannis, I'm fine to take Anthony Davis with him. Obviously, the poor free throw percentage, it might improve this year again, but I'm not counting on it, so I'm not worried about that. In a punt free throw percentage, Anthony Davis is pretty much a top 6 or 7 player. The blocks are really nice. The scoring's really nice. So I think he would be the number one priority if he does fall to you. If not, based on the way ADPs are going, I probably would agree with you into wait with a Gobert or a Robert Williams with pick number 3. And then, maybe look at someone like either a DeJounte, depending on when your playoffs are. A Shai Gilgeous-Alexander are both really good examples. Guys that are point guards who are really good at field goal percentage. They maybe don't give you the value in threes that other point guards do, but excellent points, rebounds, assists. DeJounte's elite in steals. So I think those guys are the point guards that I might be chasing. You could have a look at a Ja Morant if you wanted to go with, depending on how your league views him. Again, it's hard to know. If you wanted to go maybe a Gobert in the 2nd round and a Ja Morant in the 3rd round, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. Depending on how you think your league views those other guys, because I think Gobert is a really, really nice pairing with the Giannis. It's an easy punt, free throws, and threes build. Gobert in that build is like a top 5 player. So if you really want to just make sure you lock him in, then I think one of those other point guards will be there. And I don't think it really matters one way or the other. If you have a strong preference out of DeJounte, Shai, and Ja, I think that you might be better off getting them first and getting Gobert. If you're a bit whatever about those 3, then I would just try to lock in Rudy Gobert, unless Anthony Davis falls to you. If Anthony Davis falls to you, I think that is fine. If you do go a Gobert or even a Robert Williams, especially a Robert Williams, just be aware of your points. It's hard to come back with those guys, so you want to be trying to get someone who's a good point scorer in your 4th round. So if a Zion does make it back to you, that would be the reason I would take him there. I think he's going to be close to 28 to 30 points a night. He could even be higher than that. And for that reason, if you think that he might be available at that point, Paul George's field goal percentage, you're going to be able to recover it pretty easily with Giannis already on your team. If you manage to get him with Gobert, and if you think and you suspect that Zion might still be available in round 4 in a 10-team league, then Paul George's field goal percentage won't destroy your team, and his points, steals, assists are going to still be very useful. So I wouldn't automatically rule him out, but those other guys that we are considering are probably a little bit better in those punt free throw builds. So that makes a lot of sense to me. All right, let's move on to the next question here. So this guy here was asking about Houston Rockets players. So he's listed the 4 guys, and they are very exciting players. Kevin Porter Jr., Alperen Sengun, Jalen Green, and Jabari Smith. Houston has 4 players, all expected to have a strong season. In which order would you rate them as to who you mostly believe can exceed expectations? So, kind of a 2-parter question. How would I rank them? At the moment, I would go in a pure 9 category, or sort of how I would value them in a punt, kind of the way that I like to rank them, and how I think they should go in terms of order. I would rank them Alperen Sengun, Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr. I think Sengun is probably speaks for himself. The hype is getting pretty crazy, but I think it's warranted. Kevin Porter Jr., I think, is maybe a surprise. I think people might be thinking that Jalen Green would be ahead of him, and I think he's ranked ahead of him in most sites, and maybe most analysts would say that he goes ahead. But I think that Kevin Porter Jr. in a punt free throw build, especially if you're punting free throws and turnovers with maybe like a Luka starter, Kevin Porter Jr. is an excellent target for me. I'm really buying Kevin Porter Jr. stock this preseason. I really liked what I saw at the end of last season. I think it can translate. His three-point shooting is actually one of the more underrated parts of his game. He's a really good three-point shooter. I think he shot like 39% from last year, and it was on difficult shots. So again, I think it's something that he has enough evidence and enough data to suggest that he is a good three-point shooter. So I think that the field goal percentage will not be horrible. It was bad last year, but I think it will be better again this year. Their free throws and turnovers will probably still be there. But in a punt free throw team, you would expect to get a lot of those big guys that can make up for that field goal percentage. And his threes, assists, steals are all really, really valuable in that kind of a build. So I've got him ahead of Jalen Green for that reason. Jalen Green, I think he'll still be really good. I'm expecting a big jump up from him compared to last season. He's just a little bit more empty, in my opinion. He's one of those kind of guys that I don't really love to draft. Lacks the steals, lacks the blocks, lacks the rebounds as well. Maybe the assists can come up to 3.5, 4 per game, I would hope. And then, yeah, points and threes will be there. I don't think the percentages are going to be very good either. Like, his free throw percentage isn't elite. He's not a guy who's getting to the line 8 times, 85%, like a Devin Booker type. So that doesn't help his value. If that does come along, it does change things. I'm just not ready to project it just yet. So I think that's why he and Kevin Porter Jr. are really close to me. And then Jabari Smith Jr. is the last guy. Although these guys are all quite smushed together pretty close and like a 55 to 75 kind of range for me. They're all really, really quite close. And I think all of them have pretty much top 50 upside in certain builds. So Kevin Porter Jr. punt free throw build, Jabari Smith in a punt field goal percentage, Şengün if you're punting turnovers. I think all could get top 50 upside. So I like the majority of them. I think the best value in who could exceed expectations, which was the second part of the question, my picks there would be Kevin Porter Jr. and Jabari Smith, just because I think they're being slept on a little bit more than Şengün and Green, which are very much the hype guys, whereas the other guys are kind of being forgotten a bit. So I like Kevin Porter Jr. and Jabari Smith Jr., the juniors, as the guys who can exceed expectations as far as their ADP and rank goes. So, I do like me some of those Houston guys, and they're going to be a massive league pass team to watch and keep an eye on for fantasy purposes. Very excited to watch those guys once the season comes around. Next question here is an interesting one. How much do you weight total value versus per game value when drafting? Do you lean more towards totals at the top of your draft? Is there a point in which you transition more on per game? He's struggling a lot with the end of the second and start of the third round, where you have guys that are better per game like Fred VanVleet, CP3, and Butler, versus guys who will likely be better on totals like DeJounte, Cat, Edwards, etc. 9-cat head-to-head league. So in a head-to-head league, it is tricky. In general, I would say that I do, for the first 2 or 3 rounds, I like to rank totals over head-to-head. Over per game. The issue is trying to project totals is extremely difficult. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I can confidently say that I know that Cade Cunningham is going to play more games than Fred VanVleet. I just simply don't know that. I can hedge my bets a little bit and say, yep, sure, the younger guy versus the older guy, the team that's Fred VanVleet's playing 38 minutes a night. He's got a few niggling. Yeah, you might say that more likely or not, I'll hedge my bets that those guys are playing. But I don't know, okay? So when it's those kind of comparisons, I do just lean back on a per-game kind of process. But in saying that, when they're guys that are really, really close, like I actually really like Cade, I really like DeJounte Murray still. If you feel more comfortable drafting those guys, I don't think there's any issue with the guys that you've mentioned there. I think, someone like a CP3 as well, I think you've got to always, he's not getting better. He's turning 38 this year. He's not getting better than he was last year. He will take a step back. How big of a step back is the question. It might just be another small step back, but it will be a step back in my opinion. So you do still want to allow a bit of room for growth where you're drafting guys. Even in the first and second and third rounds, you want to do and extract as much value as you possibly can. So for that reason, if you're obviously seeing my rankings, I do have CP3 back a little bit for that reason, because I just don't, there's not much growth for that. Jimmy Butler is someone I see falling a lot in drafts. There is a point in which I say, look, man, this guy was nearly a first-round dude last year per game, especially in a head-to-head league. I'm drafting him. I'm just hoping, I'm crossing my fingers that he's going to be available in the playoffs, because that's the other thing with injuries and totals and per game. You can try and predict if someone's going to get injured. It's another thing entirely to predict when they're going to be injured. It's just hard and nearly impossible to do. Basically, it is impossible to do. So the times where I will say that I will absolutely deduct someone because of their injuries is when I know someone's missing time. So an example would be like a Kawhi Leonard. I can 99% guarantee you that he's going to miss 15 games at a minimum because he's going to rest all of his back-to-backs. And so for that reason, even though I think he's a first-round player on a per game, I'm not taking him there. I'm taking him mid to the late second round, because I can already just log in. He's got a ceiling of 67 games, and that's as high as he can possibly get. Someone who's starting the season injured, obviously like a Jaren Jackson Jr., Lonzo Ball is reported not to make the start of the season. So those guys, yes, I'm definitely discounting them very heavily. Guys that have like multiple lingering issues in the same area, Kristaps Porzingis, knees, he's someone who I discount a bit. Anthony Davis is someone who is consistently injured with like a similar lower body and also shoulder injuries. He's discounted. But someone like a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I think it's a bad rap. He had plantar fasciitis a couple of years ago, which was a legitimate injury and got quote-unquote shut down. Last year, what was his actual injury last year? Was it an ankle? I feel like he might have had an ankle or a hamstring or something like that. Came back, was awesome during the playoffs. So if you had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the playoffs last season, he was actually like a top 10 dude. So he was actually a good guy to have last year. Then the last couple of weeks in the season, as most teams do, he got shut down. So that's fine. It was them a bit of a tank job. Fred VanVleet's had a couple of injuries here and there. Paul George has had like a couple of injuries here and there, but they've not really linked together. Like Paul George's was his elbow last year. Players like a Bradley Beal, like a random wrist thing. Damian Lillard, the abdominal injury. I'm not worried about those kind of injuries because I think there's no clear pattern or something that's reoccurring. So I'm not really discounting those guys much at all, and I don't think that you should really bake into your projections missing games because they've missed games in the past. I just think it's you start to overthink things too much. And at the end of the day, you don't know. And it's okay to admit that you don't know. So what we do know is that Jimmy Butler is a great fantasy player. When he's out there, he's basically a top 20 guy locked in. And that's what we know. Okay, so when they're really close, which I think Jimmy Butler and a Cade Cunningham are, if you want to go Cade, then sure, go for it. I think it's probably a safer option. It's better to be safe earlier in drafts. But if you want to go a Jimmy Butler and cross your fingers, I think that's fine too. What I do also want to say, I've probably gone on this question a little bit longer. What I do also want to say is I also just don't want to stack those guys up on top of each other. So I think in a few mocks you've seen me take like a Kevin Durant earlier, which could be considered a risky guy. I then pass on a player like a Kawhi Leonard because I don't want to pair those two together. And I'll grab a Devin Booker or something like that, who I consider to be a pretty safe and reliable guy. You maybe don't want to... If you feel like you want to target a Kristaps Porzingis later in the draft because you think he's awesome value if he's going in the 40s, which I think he is, then maybe you want to take a safer guy earlier so you can make the most out of that kind of value. So that's what I kind of think. I don't want to stack those quote-unquote injury-prone guys on my team altogether, but I'm definitely okay grabbing one or two of those guys in the first half of my draft if they fall to the right value. So I probably didn't answer your question entirely because I think it's very specific on different players, but that's my general philosophy when it comes to totals versus per game. I know Dan Bestbris is very big on totals. I think it's really easy to look back on something in retrospect and go, oh, yeah, this guy made it here on totals, so he's going to be back here again. But, Damian Lillard last year, if you would have done that last season and bumped him up your draft board, well, look how that turned out. Karl Anthony Towns a few years ago was the Iron Man, never missed a game. And then he fell over and broke his wrist or something freaky. So you just can't predict those kind of things. And yeah, I think you just got to go based on what you do know. And what we do know is some of these guys, when they're on the court, they're going to provide these, and these stats. So I guess that's sort of a long-winded answer to a bit of both is kind of the way that I value those sort of things. I hope that helped your question there. But thank you for sending it in for that one. I think a lot of people will get some good value out of that answer. Okay, so let's go with the next question. This person's asking about factoring in 3-point percentages as part of their league. So they use 3-point percentage instead of turnovers. He's saying that he imagined this is a common setup. I think that, turnovers is, and the typical 9 categories is the most common setup, and that's why I use it in my guide. But I think this is not a bad way to do it. I don't know if I love it, because if you pair 3-point percentage with threes as well, it's kind of like a double counting category. And then you've got points on top of that and field goal percentage. So if you're getting a guy that's hitting a lot of threes efficiently, there's 4 categories that he's helping you in. So I think it's a little bit weighted too strongly to those kind of guys. That's just my opinion, though. He's saying that it makes punting field goal percentage and free throw percentage harder, as those players often tank 3-point percentage, and you don't get decent to automatically, I'm not sure if this is worded well, choosing bigs. For example, Giannis, Zion, Luka, Westbrook, Draymond will often ruin your 3-point percentage. Nobody has won his league tanking free throw percentage yet, and I wonder if not having turnovers and adding 3-point percentage is a big reason why. I would definitely agree with that. I think that I would argue that it makes punting field goal percentage more viable. Because the more guys take threes, often that usually reduces their field goal percentage, because obviously threes, no matter how efficient you are with threes, you're not going to be shooting them at 60% like some of these big guys are who don't shoot threes at all. So I think punting the field goal percentage becomes more viable, in my opinion. You draft someone like a Steph Curry, you draft someone like a James Harden or a Trae Young or whatever these guys are. You're punting the field goal percentage, they're hitting threes at a decent rate. You don't have to worry about their turnovers. So in a James Harden and Trae Young situation, obviously the turnovers are a drag on their value. You don't have to worry about that. They're contributing in their threes. The volume that they're shooting the threes make that category more consistent, more reliable week to week. I think you can still do a punt free throw build if you're getting those guys that don't shoot the threes at all. And if I was to approach it that way, what I would do is I would try to grab and target some guys that shoot threes at a good clip. Maybe like just a few of those guys. I don't want to get guys who shoot threes at a high volume at a poor percentage. But if I just have a couple of those guys, because the big guys in my league are not shooting them a lot, it shouldn't affect that category. So, for example, if I'm drafting a Rudy Gobert, like his 3-point percentage is 0%, but he also doesn't take any threes. So it's not going to hurt my category there. It's just going to be a net neutral. So if I had a Seth Curry and a Rudy Gobert, well, then my 3-point percentage is going to be awesome, because I've got someone who is contributing in that category at a high clip and someone who's not contributing at all. So we're just going to, that average will be there with Seth Curry. Players like Giannis do obviously take threes. So, you've got to weigh it up, and you do need to get some volume in those percentages, because on a week-to-week basis, if you've only got a few guys contributing, it's going to be well and truly up and down and very volatile. So it is harder to do, and I would put advantage punt field goal percentage. So just keep that in mind. It does completely change. As soon as you start to chop and change the categories, it does completely change the way that we value these players. So it is quite individual to your league. I will give a shout out to say that Basketball Monster and a league like #Basketball, have excellent tools on there where you can chop and change your categories and see how it ranks out with the new set of categories. I would play around with a website like that and keep experimenting there. But those are my thoughts on that kind of build. Unfortunately, I'm not smart enough or enough of a tech wizard yet to provide that with the Ball Boys NBA. So maybe we'll have that in the future as I continue to learn and do all this sort of stuff with the website. But at the moment, I think those guys do a really good job. So there's a free plug for those websites. What else have we got next? Okay, so here's an auction question. We don't get a lot of those. So if we're contributing $95 out of a $200 budget, who would you rather put it towards, Jokic and Holiday, or a Harden versus Halliburton? So I guess he says, for example, so I don't know if this is exactly these specific players. Which way do you lean? He seems much more solid than everyone else. He likes to go for a balanced approach, but usually you can never trade two $30 players for a $60 player, so I'm wondering if it's actually smart business to getting a star or two in the later picks. So let's go from a more general point of view. Stars and scrubs versus balanced, I guess, is the general question here. Those are the two most common strategies. I'm in the balanced approach, but it depends. It depends at what price those top guys are going, and it also depends on how many people are in your league. You've listed that you've got a $200 budget here, which is pretty standard. If you've got a deeper league, then the stars and scrubs become less viable, and the balanced approach becomes more viable. In a shallower league, stars and scrubs paying up for those big guys is more viable because the guys that you're replacing the balanced guys with on the waiver wire are better. Okay, in a deeper league, you're grabbing someone who's like the 200th ranked player off the wire, or 150th, depending, versus like a 10 or an 8-team league. Like, you're getting guys who could still be top 100 guys. So the gap is way bigger in a deeper league. So there's that side of things. In general, I prefer the balanced approach because, one, it insulates you from injury. If you spend a large majority of your budget on a Nikola Jokic, if he gets injured, then you're kaput, right? You're done. And that's not something that I want to rely on. I mean, just because someone's been healthy before doesn't mean they're going to continue to be healthy. We've seen random freak injuries. Again, it could just be a matter of timing. Maybe Jokic just misses 3 games in your first week of the playoffs with a rolled ankle. And again, it's just shit timing, and you've lost your league because of that, because you spent a large majority of your budget. Injuries suck regardless, but they suck a lot less when you're not spending all of your budget on that player. So I like the balanced approach for that reason. I also think that a lot of the time, those first-round guys, in general, get outbid. Their price goes higher than what it should do, because a lot of people like to have those guys on their squads, and you probably see that when you discuss saying that it's hard to trade two $30 players for the $60 player. I mean, of course, it's usually better in that respect to have that better guy, but when you are drafting initially, you want to get all your players at value. And I think that you're more likely to do that with the balanced approach than you are with the stars and scrubs approach. If you do see someone who's, a really expensive guy going for cheap, I think you should still try and get in there if you think it's good value. But often the case it's not, in my experience. So that's what I do. And the other thing is, everyone's going to have different builds. So if you, in an auction, the best thing about auctions is you can go into an auction having a strategy already prepared. You can already have a punt strategy, and your value of each player will change dramatically, right? So if I'm punting free throws, I will value Rudy Gobert probably more than I would value a Steph Curry. Steph Curry typically will go for more expensive than a Rudy Gobert, but I'm going to get more value out of Rudy Gobert, and he's going to be worth more to my team than a Steph Curry will be worth. So that's where you can get more value. And when you go the balanced approach, you can target a lot of those guys whose value will change dramatically, as opposed to just one or two when you get the stars and scrubs kind of build. So if we were to use your example there, I think a Harden Halliburton, I would prefer that build, and then I would easily go punt turnovers, punt points, and I'm looking really, really good. I've got heaps of assists, free throw percentage, threes. My steals are really, really good. Jokic and Holiday is a good punt threes kind of start, but again, Holiday is somewhat replaceable. Jokic is elite. In a projections, they're actually kind of similar in my opinion, but again, I just want to insulate myself in case Jokic goes down, because then if that happens, I'm kind of screwed, right? You can't really come back from that kind of an investment. And the last and final question that we're going to go through here, a bit more of a general question. Hi again, will your stats projections for players be a part of the season guide at some stage? The way I read the current stats, it's all ones from last year, and the short answer to that one is no, I'm not going to include my projections for every single player in a numbers format like a lot of other sites do. What I've done is in each player's descriptions, for where I see relevant changes in a player's stats, I have written that out in the description. If I think, for example, that a player has an ability to match their per 36 numbers, or I think that they're going to match the numbers that they had from the end of last season, I'll describe that in there. If it's a bit more specific, like a Karl-Anthony Towns, for example, I think I've written in there that I expect his rebounds to maybe take a slight dip, his field goal percentage to take a slight dip, blocks to take a slight dip. I've written where I expect them to be in his description there. But again, like I sort of referenced earlier, it's more just a time thing for me. I'm a one-man squad at the moment. I'm trying to do podcasts. I'm trying to do questions and answers, run the website, still working a full-time job. So it's just a time thing, really, and also just my skill and knowledge of being technologically savvy. Just taking all of those projections and making the changes to minutes and usage and things like that. I haven't quite figured out an efficient way for me to do that for this season. It is something that I do want to do in future iterations of the season guide, but at this stage, I'm just putting all of that information into each player's description where I feel like they're relevant. If it's a player like Drew Holiday or Chris Middleton, for example, and I don't expect really much to change, I've just describe that in the description of each player in their blurb. So I feel like that's the way that I'm going to go about it. If you have any specific questions on what you think my projections are, ask me and I can give you those answers and give you those things. If you want it to be something that's a bit more private, message me on Twitter or message me on Instagram and I can shoot you those through. But otherwise, yeah, I think go based on what I've described and discuss on the players' profiles, and I think that will give you the closest opinion of what I think of each player and how I think that they're going to project for this coming season. So that will do it for us today, guys. So remember, again, if you want your questions answered in these Q&A podcasts that we will be doing fairly regularly and even into the season, happy to discuss specific teams like we did in this episode. Go over to ballboysnba.com, sign up, $10 will cover for you for the entire season. If you sign up, make sure, don't cancel it. I've had a couple people sign up, see that it's a yearly thing, and cancel it because they don't want to be deducted the fee for next season. Don't cancel because that will remove your ability to access all the content. All season guide subscriptions will be cancelled at the end of the season. I've just done it this way so it's not a monthly thing. I didn't want to charge everyone for every month. I want it to cover the whole year. At the end of the season, everything will be cancelled. And if you wanted to sign up again next year, you'll have the option to do so. But everything will be cancelled at the end of the season, so don't worry about that. I know it's really annoying having to cancel things that you forget about, but nothing will tick over for next season unless you sign up again. But if you cancel that subscription, it will limit your access to the season guide. So if you have done that already, just message me, let me know, give me the email, and if I can see that you have paid, then I can issue a refund, and then you can just subscribe again. But check out ballboysnba.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. If you are listening along Apple Podcasts, 5-star rating. Let us know your thoughts, and I'll see you guys next time. Laters.